Hello, today we are going to analyze e4, c5, c3 variation, which, maybe the main person who played it for many years is Grandmaster Sveshnikov. He liked it very much, and actually maybe his input into the theory of this variation is the biggest. At that time there were no computers, and of course things were not so easy for black. Nowadays it's becoming more and more difficult for white to get an advantage, but in any case this is a very serious anti-Sicilian line for white, and it can be part of your repertoire definitely as a white player. And of course playing black here you cannot anymore, as we saw in the first two lessons, just play out of general grounds, develop pieces like knight c6, g6, and get a normal game. Here you need to know really theory, and play becomes, pretty forced in certain variations. Even though, of course, black has a choice of decent options, but things are not so easy after c3. Why? Because c3 is a very logical move. White just wants to play d4 and to get the center, so it logically must be a serious option. So now first let's consider sidelines. Sometimes black is playing d6 here, but it's not extremely logical, because of course white just gets the center after d4. Black is playing knight f6. Most of the time this is a way to play for a win with black. Let's say if you are playing against a weaker opponent who wants to play safe and knows the theory with after c3, and you want to get just a playable position, maybe slightly worse, but at least that it's a game. But that's not what I would recommend otherwise, unless you really need to win and you are pretty much superior than your opponent, because objectively it's not extremely sound. I mean, normally white should definitely be slightly better having the center. So the justification is dc5, black has knight c6. That is an important move, and after f3 there is d5, because changing queens after dc5 leads to a slightly worse endgame, but after d5 situation is not clear. And in case of c takes d6, black takes on e4 and also seems to have a good game here. But white first of all has a very decent move f3 with quite some theory, but actually the main problem is simply bishop d3, and I suppose black has nothing better than playing g6 here. Better probably immediately g6, because here knight even can get to c3. So g6, again, if dc5 there is d5, might be okay for black. But white can just develop h3 to stop bishop g4, knight f3, castles, and with the center, white definitely must be slightly better here. So let's say queen c7, sometimes black is playing rook e1, and it's a game. Of course, black hadn't equalized fully, that is clear, but also, again, black can play this position and can try to play for a win. But, it's not something I would recommend you to play d6, because it simply doesn't equalize. Then knight c6 is not working so well. Actually, doesn't make much sense to play knight c6 here, because after d4 there is nothing better for black than to play d5. And here, if dc5, maybe this endgame might be okay for black. Maybe, it's hard to say, but the main point that white can simply take on d5, and after queen takes d5 we get to a theoretical position from c3 d5 variation. Then I don't see why to start with knight c6, especially since it's not considered to be the best option for black to put the knight on c6 so early, so doesn't make sense. Then you already better play second d5. Another e6 is a very decent move. The main problem of this move is that you need to know French defense, and that somehow doesn't go together with a first c5, a move which you play. And then in case of c3, all of a sudden black is transposing to French. So that is why this move is not very not played too often, because after d5 now, well, first of all, e takes d5. Now again, e d5, knight f3 is some kind of French defense. So you need to know this type of positions. It's very solid for black, by the way, and quite difficult for white to get anything in particular, but that's already a different opening. After queen take d5, again, then it's not clear why we have played e6 and not second d5, because we could have get this position via d5 immediately. But on top of this, white can play e5 and move to this French, which, by the way, I covered in my first part of this e4 opening series. So again, doesn't make much sense. It's not that it's bad, but yeah, you were supposed to play Sicilian, as I understand, if you play d4 c5. So that's why those moves are not very popular, but so the main two moves are d5 and knight f6. So let's start with d5. Well, the main point is that black is making use of the fact that white's pawn is on c3. So normally, as for instance you remember from Scandinavian defense, e4, d5, white would gain quite some tempis and have a certain development advantage, because he would go knight c3 with a tempi, the queen starts to run. Here with the c3, c5 included, the queen is pretty safe on d5, so there is no knight c3, and black is fighting for the center with this move. So it's a very solid move. Maybe knight f6 instead of d5. Second knight f6 is even more straightforward and actually poses white quite serious problems in the sense of fighting for opening advantage. But here also d5 might be good enough to equalize if black knows well what he is doing. So now let's say knight f3 or d4, it leads to the same position normally. After d4, knight f6, there is nothing better than playing knight f3. So let's say we can start with knight f3. And so usually most of the players are playing knight f6 here. Knight c6 is a little bit dubious unless you try to transpose after d4, which seems to be logical. Now black can transpose playing knight f6, and this line maybe is more interesting than theory shows, the modern theory, because it's not very popular, but in fact it might be actually even good enough to equalize. But anyway, with this we will consider we are the fourth knight f6 move order. Otherwise, after knight c6, d4, there is a direct line. Black sometimes plays cd4, cd4, e5. It's pretty dubious. Frankly, I mean, of course, it's very straightforward. Black just wants to develop and make a draw somehow, but it's not so easy. First of all, there is some strange move bishop e2 here, with the idea after ed4 to play castles, because because of this pin on the d line, of course your white is not losing the knight, and then it still seems to have certain initiative, but also the old main line, so to say. I remember I won once a game against Jeroen Piquet in rapid chess. This position is pretty forced. e4, knight e5, let's say black takes, playing knight e7. Well, maybe black has chances to equalize, but still it's not completely clear if he manages. Why? Because white has two bishops. So somehow this line is very passive for black actually, and black is just fighting for a draw, but without a clear guarantee that he will manage to achieve it. So probably not fully equalizing. That's why the cd5 is almost forgotten line. Another option is to play bishop g4. This is also very rarely played. I mean, much more with a knight on f6 instead of knight on c6. But yeah, it's maybe not so bad. The only question is maybe d takes c5. This move, queen takes d1 check, king takes d1. This position actually is always not so easy for black, strangely enough, because it looks like there is a lot of play, but okay, at least computers are not so sure if black has enough to equalize here, so it has to be checked. But in case of bishop e2, black can try to take on d4 and play e6. It's also, it's quite risky actually, this variation, knight c3, queen a5, castles, knight f6, because of course black have developed his bishop, because normally black can get this type of position, as we will see later with a bishop on c8. But of course bishop on g4 is much more active, so if he manages to finish his development, black should be perfectly fine. But of course for now, for the moment, there's quite a serious deficit of development. So let's say after h3 it seems that probably better to take on f3, because in case of bishop h5, white starts very active play like this, g4, queen b3, attacking the pawn on b7, queen b4, let's say bishop e3, bishop d6, knight e5, some very direct play, because as I've mentioned already, white must try to make use of his development advantage. And it seems, according to theory, that black is suffering a little bit, not in time to finish his development the way he wants and to equalize fully. So maybe that is slightly better for white. But actually after bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, rook d8, let's say in case of bishop e3, bishop e7, it seems that black will finally manage to castle and has actually good chances to equalize. Or let's say bishop takes c6 check, bc, queen f3, queen a6, and all what black needs is just to, to finish his development, then he will be fine, and it seems that he's perfectly in time for that. But of course, instead of h3, there are different moves here. So all in all, this is a very rare line. You can try to make it work for black, but first I think the dc5 should be analyzed, this position, because here black seems to be forced to sacrifice the pawn, and who knows if it's enough or not. In any case, knight f6 is much more popular in this position. Well, white is playing d4. There is sometimes white can start with knight a3, but there is not much sense, because you cannot manage really without d4 with white, and it's not clear yet if the knight on a3 is going to be placed. Sometimes it goes to other squares, so I don't see much sense of playing first knight a3. That's why, most of players are going d4 here. And here black has a choice of different systems. The most solid and probably the most popular nowadays is e6. Very, very solid play. No risk of getting much worse here for black, but at least white has some tries also here. So it's not completely clear if black fully equalizes after e6, but other moves are not so easy. So of course the simplest is just to take on d4, because if you take here, you force white to take back with the pawn. So you're creating an isolated pawn, but as we see now already, white can win some tempi attacking the queen with knight c3, and usually the game develops like this. Black is playing queen d6, and we get to a typical position with isolated pawn, but the difference with some other lines which we will consider later, that white's bishop can develop much more actively to d3 or even c4, also interesting, but normally white is playing bishop d3, knight c6, castles, bishop e7, and now, for instance, a3, castles, bishop e3 is one of the way to proceed. I think I won once also rapid chess, I believe, against Judith Polgar sometime in the 90s, this position. But another way to play is knight b5, queen d8, and bishop f4. Knight d5, bishop g3, so just the idea to activate the bishop to get him to this diagonal. Castles, let's say rook c1, a6, knight c3. Well, a typical position with isolated pawn, but quite a good version for white. So in any case, it's very solid for black, and if you like this type of game, playing against the isolated pawn, it is perfectly playable, this variation, but I doubt it fully equalizes. So that's why also it's not very fashionable. Yeah, because it seems that white can get, first of all, a game and maybe even objectively be slightly better. So that's why black usually tries not to hurry taking on d4, not to allow knight c3 very quickly. Then what else? Bishop g4 is a serious system, and it used to be very popular. Even I remember I played a bit of e4, c5, c3 in the 90s, and I played few games against Garry Kasparov in rapid chess, blitz, I don't think in classical chess. And at that time, bishop g4 Garry was actually playing like this, and it was considered to be quite good. But nowadays theory, poses some questions. So it's maybe not so easy to equalize with black after bishop g4. Because, okay, of course, if white is playing bishop e2, that was the main theory. e6, h3, bishop h5. Now there is some strange way of playing for white. It's very sharp. Like this, seems to be very unclear, very strange position, needs to be analyzed. But normally white castles, knight c6, bishop e3, cd4. I think one of my games against Garry Kasparov went exactly like this. And now, of course, knight d4 is quite harmless. Black is in time to finish his development and he's equalizing. But after cd4, black has to be very accurate, because again, the same idea, white wants to play queen b3 and quickly g4, knight e5, get his initiative going. But queen d6, queen b3 castles, it seems to me that black is in time to equalize here. Rook fd1, rook fd8, rook ac1, now very important move, queen b4, and according to theory and to engines, black is just in time to equalize in this position. So maybe this bishop e2 line is not so dangerous. But there are two moves which are actually quite dangerous. First of all, again, d takes c5. Because the problem is that after queen c5, here, let's say h3, knight a3, white wins lots of tempes attacking this queen, and bishop e3, then sometimes knight b5 comes. So this doesn't seem to be enough to equalize for black. So black probably has to take and play knight c6. And now there is a move b4. Of course, this position is very double-edged and needs to be analyzed. Actually, visually it looks pretty fine for black, but modern engines are not so sure. They still give a certain plus for white. They believe after bishop e3, for instance, knight d5, bishop c4, one of the possible variations. Long castle, king c1, g6, knight d2. Frankly, looks like black has a fantastic compensation for the pawn, but computers are giving a small plus for white in this position, so hard to say if after dc5 this compensation is enough for equality or not, but it might be because looks active. But actually the most annoying move is knight bd2. And actually that was at that time a novelty. I played in blitz game against Garry Kasparov and won. Knight bd2. At that time there were no games on it. I think it was 1995, if I remember well, some blitz tournament in Moscow. So knight d2, and this seems to pose serious problems for black. There is no way, at least shown so far, how black can equalize after knight bd2, because for instance, if knight c6, then we already know dc5. This idea, at least black cannot change queens anymore, and let's say after e5, bishop c4, queen c5, queen e2, even if the position looks very healthy for black, but still engines believe white has a plus in this position. Again, because the queen is a bit exposed and can get under some attack at some point, knight b3, knight e4, b4, so queen on c5 is not very well placed. And probably the main move is e6. And now, okay, queen a4 check, this looks dangerous, but seems that black is in time to finish development at least. But quite annoying move is queen b3. And it seems that black is... nothing really special for white, but I don't see any clear way how to equalize here. Maybe a6 with the idea bishop c4, queen c6 looks quite dubious, frankly, but at least computers are more or less, holding it. Maybe because CD4, I think it's a move which was played a few times, but here it seems to me that this endgame knight takes d4 is again maybe not much, but quite pleasant for white. So I'm not sure if we can say that black is fully equalized in this position. So bishop g4 is at the moment experiencing some troubles. Yeah, it's not so easy to equalize once they players understood that bishop e2, which was almost automatic, in the 80s, and then some ideas like knight d2 and dc5 started to be explored, and because here probably black is in time, but after knight d2 and dc, situation is not so clear. So that's why there is a move knight c6. Actually, again, yeah, it is quite a rare move for some reason. I don't know why, because it's very principled, and I believe it can be checked very seriously. It might actually be enough to equalize for black, but because white doesn't have such a big choice here. In case of bishop e2, now the difference is that black already can take on d4, and after cd4 play e6, and you see this position, bishop is on e2. Of course, it's much less active. Actually, black is practically tempi up compared to this fifth cd4, this line which I have shown you, because white will probably at some point move his bishop anyway to d3 or c4. So here black already with a tempi up should be okay, even though still it's a game. Of course, it's playable for white. But, and so otherwise, maybe it's actually tricky move order to start with bishop e3 here, and in case of bishop g4, already to play d takes c5, forcing black to play bishop g4. That is interesting, but otherwise d takes c5 is supposed to be main move. Again, queen c5, knight a3 doesn't look good for black, because knight b5 is very unpleasant threat, and bishop e3 as well. So queen takes d1, king takes d1, and now maybe bishop f5, because bishop g4, bishop e3 might be in white's favor, but here you can get the bishop on f5, and this position has to be analyzed. Actually, there is not much theory in here, but it might well be that black just have enough compensation for the pawn. So bishop e3, for instance, knight d5, king c1, e6, now you have to play b4, bishop e7, and then it's a game. I mean, seems to be, to me, looks again like black might easily have enough compensation and actually have a good game. Hard to say. Again, computer is still giving a small plus for white, but definitely playable. So at least knight c6 I can recommend you. This is a very rare move, but to me it's actually might equalize, but some more work analysis required. Otherwise, okay, then the main move is e6. That's the most popular option, and many top players were playing like this. For example, Fabiano Caruana and others. So here, what are the options? If bishop e2, then black can take on d4 immediately. It's probably better than to wait, because here, if black waits, taking then c4 and knight c3 might give white a certain small, not much, but small plus maybe. But again, as I've mentioned already, cd4 is pretty fine. So we get this or that way, we get to this position. Yeah, like white is playing in the same fashion, rook c1, but of course bishop on e2 is very passive. It would have been much better to have it on d3 or c4. And but still playable position, queen b6, queen d2, rook d8, for instance, rook d1, bishop d7, then followed by bishop a8, at some point a6. Computer says that it's more or less equal, gives it assessment equal. It's a playable position, so you know those typical positions with isolated pawn are pretty much a matter of taste. Yeah, so you like it from the white side or from the black side, but it's definitely playable for both sides. But it's not a really big test for black setup, bishop e2. Yeah, of course, it would be much nicer to develop the bishop to more active square. But after bishop d3, now already, of course, black doesn't take on d4. So he's playing like this. c4, if bishop e3, rook d8. So c4, now black has queen h5, that is an important resource. And as kind of a little dubious as it looks, because queen on h5 might potentially get into trouble, and being maybe even trapped one day, but it seems that it's not getting trapped. After knight c6, everything works, and according to theory, black is doing well here. So let's say white can repeat moves, knight e5, queen h4, knight f3, black has to repeat queen h5, but there is no way that white can trap the queen. So that's why bishop d3 is considered to be pretty harmless. And then the main move is knight a3. So the idea is that after cd4, now white wants to play knight b5 and then take with a piece on d4. So cd4 is not a good move after knight a3. Probably a6 is the best move, just to stop once and for all knight b5 idea. What else? Queen d8 is possible, but then bishop f4 seems to be quite dangerous. And after a6, dc5. So white is trying to make use of his development advantage. And the question is how, if black will be in time to develop his pieces, and then he would equalize, but it's not so clear. It's supposed to be not very accurate queen d8 because of bishop f4. Another move is knight c6. This is one of two serious theoretical moves, knight c6 and a6. The knight c6, knight b5 is a very serious option, queen d8. Now the thing is that in case of bishop f4, black can play knight d5, so it doesn't work, and followed by a6. Therefore, dc5 is white's idea. Bishop takes c5, queen d8, king d8. And there is some theory here. Okay, in general, this endgame is fine for black. If he just manages to develop a6, king a7, bishop d7, there wouldn't be any problem. But white can try to play bishop f4, etc. But again, it seems that black is always in time to get a good game here. So this is supposed to be fine for black. But maybe bishop e3 is a challenging move. So now white is threatening dc5, and it will be difficult to take back this pawn. Therefore cd, knight b5 here, queen d7. For some reason, don't ask me why, but it's supposed to be a bit more accurate than queen d8. And knight bd4. And this position, it might not be so easy for black to equalize here, because usually black plays knight d5, and here white can play bishop d2, and then just trying to develop and try to get a bit of a kind of more pleasant game. Even bishop d3 is actually interesting. Knight e3, f3. Then, of course, white is trying to play for initiative, probably followed by queen c2, long castle. A complicated game, but it's not so clear if black fully equalized here. That's why a6 again is the most solid and maybe the best move. Knight c4 is the main theoretical move, and knight bd7. Now a4, because black would like to play b5, bishop b7. a4 of course is logical, but seems that black is in time to equalize just by tempest after cd4. Let's say queen takes d4, bishop c5. And in case of queen takes d5, ed5. Knight e3, let's say bishop a7, then castle, black gets his knight to c5, and because of this position of the knight on e3, of course, if white manages to exchange his black square bishops in this position, then he would have a considerable pressure, but actually it's very difficult to manage, and otherwise black has enough piece activity to compensate this weakness of his isolated pawn, and so that is very close to equality, or maybe just equal this position. Therefore, the main move here is bishop e2, and b5 probably the best. cd4 is not good, because now already knight takes d4 actually is very strong, and white is threatening bishop, wants just to castle at some point, knight e3, bishop f3. So if not queen takes g2, then white would simply be better, but here take queen e2, black's position is pretty critical, because he cannot really develop. White has a incredible, very powerful initiative, so this is absolutely not playable for black. C takes d4, knight d4, queen g2 is bishop f3 is just better for white. But after b5, it's very narrow, it's very, very risky, again, play for black. Well, if you haven't studied this position with a computer, but seems that according to the theory, black just in time manages to equalize here, playing knight e3, let's say queen c6. There is, if I remember correctly, there is another move knight a5 here, but also seems to be, black seems to be in time to equalize. And otherwise, after knight e3, queen c6, if knight e5, queen c7, followed by bishop b7, and a4, well, if castles, black just wants to develop bishop b7, then bishop e7, castle. Again, in this variation with d5, the only black's problem is his lack of development. So once he finishes development, he doesn't have a problem usually. So that's why white has to be quite playing aggressively against this line, trying to create some problems at the very beginning, because then it will be much more difficult to create any problem for black. So here a4, bishop b7, a b, rook a8, bishop a8, and this position, as dangerous as it looks, because now the b5 pawn is becoming a bit weak, but engines manage somehow just by tempi with very accurate play. You can check it yourself. You know, everybody nowadays have engines. That it seems that black is finally equalizing here. But all in all, yeah, after d5, of course, it's very solid and perfectly playable system for black. But white still can try. Yeah, it's not totally sterilized, I would say. The c3 d5. That's why nowadays the most popular move is knight f6. It's a more straightforward, and according to the theory, it looks like white is having quite some troubles nowadays to find any advantage after knight f6. So again, there is nothing wrong with d5, but I would recommend you, if you are playing black, to analyze knight f6 and to see, because I think the amount of lines where white can still search for something is very limited already after knight f6. Almost everything was tried in all of those lines. If you know well with black, you already know how to equalize, but maybe in the main line of knight f6, the main line which I'm going to show you now, white can still try to search for some ideas. So after knight f6, white's definitely only chance to fight for advantage is to play e5, knight d5. So a pretty much improved Alapin defense, because the knight on d5 is not getting attacked so easily, and the black's idea is that he starts to counterattack the e5 pawn after knight f6, knight c6, d6. And now, of course, well, white can start with knight f3. Usually, again, if black wants to play systems with e6, he can play e6 here, but there is additional option for black to play d6, ed6, e6, and then to try to take the bishop with the bishop on d6, which is of course solid, but maybe not fully equalizing. But in any case, after knight c6, white doesn't have anything else than playing with the d4, with the bishop c4, which will transpose to the variations we are going to look at now. So d4, of course, the most logical move, and definitely for many, many years used to be the main line, but it's becoming really difficult already for white to find ideas here, in my opinion, because after, well, it's really almost sterilized many, many lines. Seems to be that black actually equalizing here quite comfortably. So at least a recent state of theory is that white is really lacking ideas here to fight for advantage. I mean, basically all ideas were already played, more or less. So knight f3 is mostly played. Well, you can also take on d6, but take on d4 and then d6. Again, knight f3 is always possible, but it will transpose. So bishop c4, there is this line. Again, if black wants to play the e6 system, he can do it now. White has nothing better than knight f3, but I consider this system as solid, but not so straightforward. At least white has some chances after e6, but knight b6 is good enough. Here it seems that there is not much white can do, because in case of bishop b3, d5 works. Of course, if black takes on e5, exchanging queens, play knight c6. If white takes on e5, queen d1 and knight c6, black is at least not worse. So white can try to play queen h5, e6 d, knight c6, but yeah, black has a good development, and let's say knight c3, for example, queen d3 is quite a nice move. Black is at least not worse. It's actually quite risky for white also, can easily get worse with white in this position, so not recommended. Otherwise, what else? Bishop b5 check. And here, at minimum, black can just play knight c6, which basically transposes to the line we are going to investigate later, knight f3, d5, because d5 doesn't really work. Black just plays a6, and actually, according to the engine, is already slightly better for black. So this is a minimum black has, but also bishop d7 is fine. Well, white has this idea to play e6 here, and this is not a blunder, but still not sure it's so good, because, well, the idea is that bishop b5, there is queen h5, attacking, well, threatening mate on f7 and attacking the bishop on b5. Queen c8, queen takes b5 check, king d8, and bishop e3. Then black takes back the pawn on e6, and white tries to develop his initiative. Well, he has compensation for the pawn. No more than that, I believe. Well, very sharp double-edged game, but at least it's playable. But probably f6 actually is good, because white is trying to play for attack here. Bishop d3, well, threatening queen h5, g6, h4. Yeah, but this pawn sacrifice is very risky for white also, because position is unclear, but probably objectively it's in black's favor. I have a feeling. For instance, bishop g7, h5, and now, for example, computer actually is recommending to play bishop c6, and in some lines is trying to get his king to d7, actually, where it's pretty solid. Let's say queen g4, knight a6, and at least modern engines are showing some, well, slight advantage for black in this position, and it's perfectly understandable, yeah, because black has development, and well, very, very risky play for white. So after cd, d6, probably the best is to play knight f3 and to transpose. That's why white can, well, usually play knight f3 first here. Now, yes, the idea is that, of course, black can play, I mean, the main move is knight c6, and actually, again, I don't see any problem for black after knight c6. That's why it's easier, I mean, simpler for black. I would recommend it, but e6 is also very playable system, and sometimes it can occur via the move order e4, c5, knight f3, e6, c3. Black sometimes plays knight f6, e5, knight d5, d4, and then we get this position, c takes d4. So it's playable, but here white can try. White has some chances to get a certain opening advantage. There are two systems. One is b6, quite dangerous system, quite a little bit dubious, but let's say knight c3, not the only move, by the way, according to theory, but so the game develops like this. Black is trying to take, and then queen c7, playing d6, castle, knight d7, putting pressure on the center, rook e1, but of course it's, well, black has certain development issues, yeah, and white is, yeah, very, very, white is playing very healthy way. I think according to theory, black is managing to equalize here with very, very accurate moves, but it's not easy, yeah, it's not so easy. And another solid line is d6. Okay, this you can get anyhow with black, this line. But again, after bishop c4, bishop e7, let's say castle, castle, white is playing queen e2. And now black has a plan of playing bishop d7 followed by bishop c6 is one plan. Another plan is knight c6, white plays rook d1. And there is a big theory here, a lot of games. It seems that black has good chances to equalize, but frankly, if I was white, I wouldn't mind to play this position, because black still has to prove that he's fine, because white has a certain space advantage and certain potential attack on the black's king in some line. So this line is playable for black, but again, also shouldn't be a problem if you're playing white, this c3 variation. That I cannot say about knight c6, very direct move. And here again, the choice is not too big for white, whether bishop c4, whether cd4. Let's say bishop c4, knight b6, bishop b3. Well, now taking the pawn on c3 is very dangerous. I mean, it's really too much. White has a very powerful initiative here, so not recommended. Usually black just plays d5. Yeah, d5, even you can also play d6, but d5 is more straightforward because it practically forces white to take ed6. Because after cd, bishop g4 followed by e6, black has a fantastic version of Caro-Kann French type of positions, and he is at least equal. Therefore, e takes d6 is practically forced, queen takes d6, and this position is played, I don't know how many thousand games were played on this position, and it seems that white is really lacking ideas here how to fight for advantage. The main move is castle. If cd, bishop e6, very important move. Yeah, that's the point that black first wants to exchange these bishops and then continue developing e6, and he's always in time to finish his development, and then with those white color bishops exchanged, of course, black will not have a slightest problem. So cd is harmless. For some time, white tried to play knight a3, but yeah, it's too risky. I believe it's not. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it because at least black can play a6, castles e6, cd4, bishop e7, and with quite a normal position because again, white knight is on a3. Of course, it should have been on c3 normally, and probably it's perfectly playable for black, but there is nothing wrong with dc3. I think that is the most principle, and it's almost a refutation, in my opinion, of knight a3, because okay, after queen d6, ed6, knight b5, rook b8, there is probably just enough compensation for white to make a draw, but even though not clear, knight g5, black can defend the pawn, protect by knight e5. So this doesn't really work, and there were some romantic players who like to play queen e2 here. It was quite a popular line in the beginning of 90s when there were no computers, because white seems to have quite a certain initiative, compensation. But nowadays, merciless engines are saying that black is just better, giving like 1.5 for black, simply taking this pawn, even though bishop f5, probably it's a good move as well. But after cb, bishop b2, queen b4 check, king f1, and this position was supposed to be, well, not so clear, yeah, because white wants to play knight b5 and has some initiative, but nowadays engines are laughing at us players of the 90s who used to analyze this position, because it just says that bishop g4, rook d1, rook d8, and basically practically lost for white. So it's probably not playable. Therefore, what else is left is to castle and bishop e6. This is a very important move. Well, dc3, yeah, because here if black just wants to take the pawn, that is very, very dangerous. And you can even see it visually that white has a very powerful initiative and big development advantage. And let's say like this, knight b5 and knight takes a7 is a threat. So white will definitely take the pawn back sooner and later and be better. So dc3 is not recommended. But bishop e6, yeah, that is a key move. That is why the whole variation is working for black. And after bishop e6, there is not, I mean, again, there were so many games here, white tried, but there is no chance for white to get anything. Takes on e6, queen e6, knight takes d4, takes, rook d8, and this position is just equal. Queen h4, let's say if queen b4, for instance, queen c6, and black just develops quietly and equalizes. So the main move is queen h4, but here black is fine in various ways. h5 is not a bad move, trying to play queen g4, but the best, according to engines and theory, even old theory, is queen e2. So why black wants to play e6, bishop e7 to develop, and also blocking a bit white's development. So this line seems to be empty simply, and no way was found for white to even to try to get a game or get some chances for advantage. So that's why yes, c takes d4 finally. White also can play, but d6 again, here the situation is quite similar, very difficult for white to find any idea. The game becomes pretty direct here. So black wants to take probably d5, bishop g4, e6, and e5 pawn can become really weak. So ed6 is not an option because black again takes queen d6 and develops the bishop on g4, and again, if he is now in time to develop, he will even be slightly better. So this is not playable for white. I mean, no chance for anything. So knight c3 is played sometimes, but not very serious. I mean, let's say one of the ways is d, knight c3, taking on d8, bc, and now, for example, bishop d7. This endgame is not better for white. Probably white is not worse if he plays correctly, but with this weak pawn on c3, I don't see any realistic chance for white to be better. Therefore, what else? Bishop c4 is the main move. Knight b6. Black can try to force an endgame playing like this, but this endgame might be a bit better for white because knight c3 has some space advantage. There is no more weakness on c3. So this is not so clear, even though black is probably very close to equalize, but still not so easy. But knight b6 seems to be really bulletproof nowadays. Yeah, it's very difficult to find something. So the bishop b3 is a possible move, but also quite risky. d5, d5, that is the idea, because again, if black takes back on e5, exchanging queens, that is already nothing for white. So d5, knight a5, and knight c3. Well, very, very risky play. So black can now has an option to play f6, just protecting the pawn, but of course white is having certain compensation here. Take g6, bishop e3, bishop f5, and it's a very strange, complicated, unclear position. The computer assesses it as equal, more or less, whatever it means, because of course the position is just very unclear. Black is pawn up, but of course white has better development, so this is at least playable for white, even though risky. But I think knight takes b3 is a very clear-cut way to equalize. Queen takes b3, e6. So knight takes e5, bishop e7. Just simply finishing development. If black castles, okay, he has two bishops and slightly better. So that's why white is playing queen b5 check, and now king f8. And it seems, because after d6, bishop e6, black will manage f6, king f7 or something. He has two bishops, so black doesn't really have problems in this position. It seems to be pretty equal. Of course, the king is a little bit, if black would manage to castle, he would just be slightly better. So with the king on f8, cannot really pretend to fight for advantage, but it's not dangerous actually for black. So bishop b3 is a way to make the game complicated, but there are two options. One is that you can just stick to the pawn and try to play for a win. Another is trying to equalize like this with successfully actually equalizing. So knight b6, bishop b5 then is the main move, and now maybe bishop d7, by the way, is quite fine here, also probably enough to equalize, but d5 is a very direct line. So again, knight takes e5, bishop d7, and at least white gets two bishops here, castles, but all black needs, as usual, in this variation, is just to finish his development, then he will be fine, and it seems that he is in time. First of all, even a6 seems to be equalizing, bishop c6, queen c6. Despite this lack of development, seems that black slowly but surely manages to get out and equalize, but rook d8 is the main line, theoretical line, bishop e3, bishop e7, white is trying to play queen g4, but castles, but there were quite many games here, but finally it was always leading to equality, because once black manages to castle, puts knight on d5, the position is simply equal. So that is the state of theory after d4, and it seems to be very difficult for white to find some ideas here, some fresh ideas. That's why when this line is played on the grandmaster level, most of the time nowadays white is trying to play bishop c4, trying to postpone d4 for the moment, or knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. It's another way of doing it, like this, which would lead to transposition after bishop b3. So bishop c4, again, if e6, then white just transposes to those lines, which are definitely playable. Knight b6 and bishop b3. Well, the main idea of this move order is trying to postpone d4 is that if black plays in the same manner, knight c6, knight f3, of course d4 leads to transposition, cd, cd, d6. Knight f3, and now if black goes d5, ed, queen d6, castle, bishop e6, then white has an interesting option, and actually quite unpleasant for black, is taking on e6, queen takes e6, a4, trying to play a5, and so far black, it's nothing too bad, too dramatic for black, but it's suffering here, it's not able to equalize fully. So that is the idea, to play like this, but it gives black a chance to play c4, bishop c2, knight c6, knight f3, and now g6 is dubious, because then playing like this, white is attacking the pawn on c4, and not sure if black can fully equalize here. Probably black can, maybe better to play actually d5 here, because it practically forces white to take on d6, and after queen d6 we get to the main line, because in case of d6, white has this additional option, queen e2. I'm not sure it is so dangerous, but still, white to give it. So, but in any case, this or that way it gets to this position ed, queen d6. Because e5 looks very logical, castle, bishop d6, but after d3, there were quite many games, and it doesn't, seem that black can equalize. Actually, white has a very nice plus in this position. Therefore, queen takes d6, castles, and this is the tabia, I would say, of this variation. Most of the players are playing g6 here. It is clearly the main move in the position, but bishop g4 actually is quite interesting and has to be checked carefully wherever you play it, white or black. Because h3, bishop h5, because the game gets quite sharp. Rook e1 and long castle. So black is playing very aggressively, and the position is very complicated. For instance, after b3, queen f6 is the best move. If white is trying to play a4, as you already see, a very typical idea, trying to push this knight with a5, then knight a5 is practically only move, and at least modern engines say that black manages to hold here, but you need to analyze this position more deeply. It's very, very sharp and complicated. But an interesting line, bishop g4, to try with black. But of course, much more solid is to play g6 here, and that is what is by far the most popular move in this position. And now, this typical a4 move doesn't work so well anymore, because bishop g7, a5. First of all, knight d7 seems to be also doing fine, but knight d5 is simpler. And black is just in time to protect his pawn on c4 and having a good game. For instance, after rook a4, there is b5. Important move, and here black is definitely fine. That's why knight a3. So, of course, white can always play d4, cd3, queen d3, but it, of course, gives completely nothing for white, just an equal position. So if white wants to fight for advantage, he's trying to attack the pawn on c4 by playing knight a3. Here, by the way, most of players are automatically playing bishop g7, but there is a bishop f5, an interesting move also to investigate. It might actually be working fine in the sense of equalizing takes on f5, gf5, b3. That is the way white is usually playing, and now the idea is to play long castle. Okay, it has to be checked really. It might not work, I don't know, but at least there were a couple of strong players who played like this, and maybe this is at least the most, very direct way of playing. like this, taking on c4, queen d3, rook e1, rook g8, and sharp, complicated position. Maybe it's okay for black, but has to be checked. So it's another interesting option if you are playing black, this variation. If you don't like so much the main line, which is bishop g7, those moves bishop g4 instead of g6 or g6 bishop f5 might work also. But bishop g7 is the main move, b3. So now if taking on b3, ab castle, then white can play first of all knight c4. Let's say this position might give white something, but normally d4 is played. And here, well, white has a good center. Yeah, nothing too bad for black either. I mean, but at least I think black still has to prove that that his position is fine. Yeah, so that is playable for white. That's why usually black prefers to play bishop e6 here. Now knight g5 is not giving anything. Bishop d5 simply. I think the main line is queen e2, pressing the pawn on c4, but here black already managed to find well, good ways to equalize, playing like this castle. And now, of course, it's always possible just to play rook d8, rook e8, but white has certain potential in this position. Sometimes can get some play on the king side. Even though computer is pretty happy with black, seeing that black is able to equalize here. But bishop d5, this plan is very direct, trying to push e5, and probably it's equalizing. Let's say if knight c4, then now black already just plays queen c7 simply, and in case of rook e1, trying to stop e5, black can still play rook e8 is possible, but actually there is also direct way of playing by taking on f3, e5, knight b5, queen d7. It seems that probably the game will there will be massive exchanges in the center, and probably black will equalize, and it would head to a draw probably here. That's why maybe what I would advise you is to have a look at rook e1 move, which is kind of tricky. Has some tactical idea behind. I mean, again, if you take, then white plays d4, and rook e1 is definitely much more useful than queen e2. And here, for instance, bishop d5, computer plays h4 and actually starts to give certain advantage to white. So this might not be so easy for black. And in case of castle, then there is a tactics. bc4, knight takes c4, rook takes e6. This is the idea, just purely tactical play. And then it leads almost by force to this position, rook fd8. Now I will give you just a couple of computer lines. Finally, at the end of the day, computer thinks that it's equal, but white, has more prospects, I believe, in a practical sense. For example, this line, pretty direct. Take on c3, bishop h6, takes, queen f6, queen e1. Now very important to play a5, trying to organize play to kick this bishop from the b3 square. Otherwise, white should be better. And here, for example, rook d6, computer says that black is just in time to equalize. Still, in a practical sense, of course, it's easier to play with white, has initiative, some potential attack against the king. So even if it's equal objectively, it's still tryable with white. Or another move is queen c2, and now there is another strange position arises like this, bishop e1. Again, computer says that it's equal, but it's very unbalanced, and you can definitely outplay your opponent here with white, also with black if you play better, and if you analyze this position. Still, it's kind of equal, but not totally equal. In a practical sense, I believe maybe it's a bit easier to play with white. So that is the state of affair of in this e4, c5, c3 variation. You can definitely have it as a weapon with white. It's perfectly playable. Black has really to know exactly what he is doing to equalize. Of course, d5 is a very solid move, but it's not empty completely. White can try after d5. Knight f6 is a problem. Yeah, this variation is very deeply analyzed for years, and with engines Probably it objectively equalizes, and that would be my suggestion, to play like this, as most of top players are now playing against c3, but still maybe you will manage to find some idea in d4 cd4. I couldn't manage, but who knows, there is probably something that you can play at least. And bishop c4, yeah, this line is still not totally sterilized, and black has to be careful here, so it's not so trivial to equalize with black here. So that is so with black I would probably advise you to play knight f6 if you want just to equalize against c3, or d5 is also probably fine, but knight f6 is the most direct and straightforward. And with white, probably in case of knight f6, all other lines are pretty playable, and there is a chance to be slightly better. Against knight f6, maybe to try to dig in this direction, and at least, of course, black will probably at the end of the day manage to equalize in this line as well, but it's not shown exactly how, and there is still a game here. So now we are going to move from the next lesson to e4, c5, knight f3, and slowly but surely getting into the main Sicilians.